to Zestful Aging, where I speak with changemakers from all over the world, from every walk of life, who will inspire you to live with zest. I'm your host, Nicole Christina, and my mission is to bring you optimism about aging and help you make full use of the new opportunities that only come at this stage of life. To find out more about this podcast, hop on over to zestfulaging.com. And while you're there, sign up for my email newsletter, The Insider, where you will get fun and quirky tidbits about the show and my exploits, including when I went python hunting in the Everglades with one of my guests. And if you love the podcast, I'd be grateful if you shared it with your friends. And check out my new YouTube channel where you will find never before heard bonus episodes at Zestful Aging 132. Today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Natasha Ginnivan, and she is a research fellow at the University of New South Wales in Australia. She's a research fellow at the Aging Future Institutes, and she researches age stereotypes, what we might call ageism, self-perceptions of aging, and the absence of aging in the media. And it's interesting because I use a graphic program called Canva. Many people, I'm sure, are familiar with it to do my social for the show. And when you click on the photograph and they want to give you some choices, and I write in the search bar, older women, what I come up with is women in their 30s. It's very difficult to find a graphic with a woman who truly is over 45. So case in point. Dr. Ginnivan researches about the rising health, social, and economic costs of Australia's aging prison population. And you may recall we spoke with actress Sandy Fish, who teaches hospice skills to older inmates in San Quentin. So this is a worldwide problem that we have aging inmates. Some of them are remaining in prison and some of them are released to the community. So it's a new problem and something that we're going to learn more about today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ginnivan.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Really happy to speak with you because this is a subject that goes under the radar. You know, we talk about women letting their hair gray naturally, maybe not getting Botox, and maybe becoming more aware that they have so much opportunity and still a lot of life left and all of this, which is a lovely thing. But you've been focusing on a neglected and marginalized population, that is the aging prison population in Australia. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, I was sort of finishing up my research about, ageism and self-perceptions of aging, and I stumbled across a program on aging prisoners in Europe or in the UK in particular. And I found it quite sort of interesting that, when we think of prisoners, we think of, young kind of people going to prison, and that mostly people are young, tough people that end up in prison, which is, again, is probably because we tend to navigate our world with these stereotypes of people and things, right? And I found it fascinating in this particular instance that prisons with the general population aging and a number of other factors have been caught off guard with a really sharp increase in older people entering the criminal justice system, and that, guards and who have to sort of, manage inmates have really had to start like doubling as carers to help people navigate. It's a really complex area because it's all individual. Like some guards, think, well, I didn't sign up to, be an aged care provider. I'm here to be a security.
So they're not So it's a new skill set, and it's not necessarily one that they're welcoming.
I think so. I mean, particularly, in Western cultures, we value independence, and that's why I suppose our medical systems and healthcare systems are set up in a way that enables as much independence as possible. But that's not always possible in a very regimented, routine, and built environment and security like oriented environment is set up for and built for younger people in the 19th century.
It's very different. And so, do you feel like some of the needs of these inmates are being addressed, or are we still behind the times with knowing how to adjust to these new needs?
Look, I think it's a mixed bag, if you like. Some places, I think particularly in the US, I've looked into some of the prisons there, and they've really sort of got things in place. I think you mentioned your other guest who has, obviously works in palliative care, and there are sort of provisions for palliative care. I know from one of the things that I looked up in the US that there's a prison in Louisiana that has, the mean sentence time, or the average sentence time of someone there is 92 years. So yeah.
They have some issues there. Let me say that was another episode of race playing an enormous role in who gets sent to prison. But okay, yes. So there are some folks there that are living the rest of their lives in the system.
Yeah, and that's a really sad sort of state of affairs that's the case, that 92 years is the average sentence time. But so the outcome of that is that there needs to be structures in place to manage individuals' end of life care. But other places that don't have that sort of sentencing, that still have an aging prisoner population coming in, and there's a mixed sort of like there's sort of different categories of older persons who enter the prison system. Here in Australia, there's sort of individuals who might have found themselves cycling in and out of the prison system since youth, and so they've never really kind of found their footing, and for whatever reason might have ended up with substance use and things like that. But there are other people who have been given life sentences, and then more recently, because we now have technology and enhanced forensic techniques, there's quite a few historical prosecutions of crimes that were committed and they were found out sort of later in life as well. And so all of these things coming together, plus our general population aging, has found that we now in Australia anyway have like over 300% increase of people over the age of 65 in the last sort of decade or so entering the system. And prisons are sort of, although they've definitely acknowledged it, sort of the directors of prisons have made it an issue, a priority. I think one of our states, Victoria, have recently put dedicated aged care protocols and things in place, which is starting to address things, but there's still a lot of issues, particularly for those who are transitioning out back into the community. There's already a lot of issues around ageism, regardless of whether you're someone who's spent time in prison or not. Ageism and aging are things that we're still, figuring out and trying to reconcile, that, we are all aging, we're all getting older. We're sort of starting to get less age denial as we used to be. But because we still have these sorts of stigmas associated with aging and potential disability that arrives with older, our older years, then that combined with someone with a criminal record is a whole other intersectionality, which is quite complicated.
So, not to be too, how shall I say, ignorant, but I can imagine, some of the issues, but can you talk a little bit more about what are the issues that now the guards have to negotiate that ordinarily, like that you said that, oh, I didn't sign up for this. What are the kinds of things that an aging population in prison bring that we hadn't seen before?
Yeah, so in the prison system, but in particular here, and I'm mostly focusing on the research I did within the New South Wales, prisons, but I have sort of looked at other states as well. But there, one of the biggest issues from what I've heard from sort of the research with custodial officers and older prisoners themselves is sort of the timeliness of specialist health care provision. So particularly like dental, oral dental health, and just the usual, like if they lose their glasses or their hearing aid, then it's not like it gets replaced the next day or even a week, and then there's not as much, there's not really any dedicated cognitive screening of the older prisoners as they enter the prison. And we know that from research, the risk factors for things like mild cognitive impairment and dementia are things that this particular, group of individuals probably are at a higher risk, but there's no screening for cognitive impairment. So dementia and cognitive impairment in the prison system can really go sort of detected for a long time, and it might impact their ability to stick with that really regimented routine that's required of, prisoners.
I see. And speaking of routine, I imagine if they're on a medicine routine, that might be difficult for them to, just do themselves, and they may need some reminding or something like that. I can't imagine, that people are going to say, oh, I better make sure I remind you to take your medicine. They're pretty busy.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, just small things that impact the the medicine routine as well would be, for example, in most prisons, that runs at a schedule so that the corrective officers, will get people up in the morning, get them into their routine, whether it's, through working or not working, whatever their status is. But by the end of the day, it's they go into sort of lockdown, as far as I've learnt from some of the reports I've read, as early as 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon. And so sometimes you have to take your medicine with food. So if you get your dinner at 2:30 in the afternoon or 3 o'clock, you may have to sort of save it till later to take your medicine, or, so that's a little bit incongruent and not optimal. And then, there's other sort of, issues as well that I've certainly read that could be a problem is this, the idea that older prisoners could be vulnerable. And so, whatever medical or medicine that they do have, there may be sort of other interested prisoners in having a go and having a look at whatever medicine they have, So there are those sorts of issues. Although they do tend to line up and take their medicine, but
it's a vulnerable population, and we can imagine that some of the prisoners will exploit that vulnerability.
Yeah, so that can happen. And then there's just sort of the availability of specialist care, like I mentioned, sort of, dental care or eye or ear care. So when they do have people that come to the prison, and in fact, in New South Wales, I've got a pretty sophisticated health network called the Justice Health Mental Health and Network. And they do a really great job of sort of giving prisoners medical care. But, like many other organisations, they're sort of funded to a certain degree, and they don't have a huge amount of like specialists that can be just rolled out at any time, whenever. So for that reason, they do have like a hospital, a prison hospital called Long Bay Hospital. And other prisoners in the state, if they do have issues, whether it's their hearing or their teeth or whatever that's got to be looked at, then they'll need to be transferred sometimes, because they can't just get someone to drive out into a remote area where there's a prison. And yeah, so and quite often the culture, I think, within prisons, people get their little niche, they get their little clique, and they don't necessarily want to leave that for an extended period of time, because it's a bit unknown. Sometimes it can range from them coming and going in 2 or 3 days and getting it done, or they can have to wait, for a couple of weeks. So they'd rather forego any medical treatment in order to sometimes just maintain their little dynamic in whatever prison. Yeah. Yeah, so it's quite complicated.
I don't know if this is true for Australia, but certainly in the U.S., there's a lot of crossover with poverty, race, and mental illness in the prisons. In fact, it's been said that the Los Angeles prison system is the largest mental health system in the country, because there's so many people who have psychiatric diagnoses. So you're, I'm guessing, dealing with a marginalized on top of marginalized population, and I'm curious what brought you to this and how you became interested in this group.
Yeah, that's right. I think because they're in prison, individuals in prison, are, as you said, quite often dealing with mental health issues that haven't been fully supported in the community. And unfortunately, we also do a very, as a country, we're still trying to improve the way that we, that we sort of deal with our First Nations people, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, and we have a very high incarceration rate of our First Nations people, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, and we don't sort of seem to have as appropriate cultural supports in place to divert them away from the system and to provide more support. And these are things that we really need to address. And so we have similar issues to you in the US, I'd say.
Well, certainly with our native population, which is no surprise, struggling with poverty and alcoholism. Right. But was there something that hooked you? You've been researching ageism in many forms, how people think about themselves as they age. You've been looking at the media, social media, and that's all sort of standard, much more mainstream, somebody who's doing aging research. But why the most vulnerable?
I think I was just taken with, that first program that I was observing, where a guard having to help an older prisoner just navigate his cell and his daily life, and just the degree to which someone will extend themselves beyond their role because they they just see the support that's needed and they step in and do it. And I just thought, what is it that helps people do that, and what is it that makes people reluctant to do that? And and just wondering, what level can we sort of bring of support with the available resources? And so I researched this with a team of people at UNSW. And we've been trying to look at how can we leverage what structures are already existing. And my colleague who's sort of leading one of the projects that I'm a part of, we sort of got some funding from the National Health and Medical Research Council to develop and pilot an audio delivered app that could potentially screen for cognitive issues in older prisoners, and making sure as much as possible that it's user friendly and has cultural friendliness as well for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population who might be coming into the prison, because as I mentioned before, there's no current sort of older age cognitive screen protocols in place. I mean, the prisons are sort of trying to slowly catch up with managing this spike in our demographic population issue, but there's not enough specialists on the ground like neuropsychologists and people like that available to do these cognitive screens. So we're trying to work as a team, including psychologists, neuropsychologists, people who program serious games, to try and put together a package that is user friendly but still valid and picks up cognitive screens, within the prisons. I mean, it's still quite new. The name of the product that we're trying to, the cognitive screen, is Escape, and I think that's the acronym for audio delivered. It's ASCAP.
I see. I was going to say there's a little irony there, right?
Yeah, we intentionally put that in. Yeah,
that's interesting. So this would be used for the administration in the prison, or this app? I see.
Yeah. So the idea is that we it's in its sort of quite early stages. We just got the funding a few years ago, and it's mostly been led by my colleagues in the sort of School of Population Health here at UNSW, and I sort of have a small role in that team as well. But it's they've been doing focus groups and trying to really co-design it with older prisoners, both male and female and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, to make sure that it's user friendly and that they'll actually take it up and use it. So that's important as well. We could design something that is valid, but it has to be user friendly as well. But at the same time, we sort of have been trying to understand what are some of the supports that older prisoners need in re-entry back into the community. So we're looking at the going in and then the leaving side of things, and trying to work out how we can best leverage things like technology, but also who's already there and what's already there, while kind of governments and prisons catch up with how to best support the aging population.
Are there any trainings for guards? Any initiatives around training guards how to deal with some of the older inmates? Yeah,
so I think there's sort of a mixed reception to that sort of idea. I think, as I mentioned, recently the state of Victoria have decided to put individuals in place. I don't know whether they're specially dedicated people to provide the aged care, or whether it's guards that are trained up as well. I'm sort of getting across that now because it's quite recent. We actually, as a team, about 5 years or more ago, we wrote a grant to try and get some funding that would model the current system that you've got in place in California. One of the California prisons called it's called the Gold Coats, and it's at the California. I'm trying to remember which prison it is, but it's a buddy system. It's a buddy system that they sort of train the trainer, where they train up eligible inmates who are interested to be care supporters, and that can, they pair them with individuals who have been diagnosed with dementia, so that they can navigate to, the canteen or the cafeteria area when it's time, and back, and then even to the closest stuff like self-care and stuff like that.
I can imagine that emotionally that might be really helpful for the mentor or the buddy.
I think that's right. I mean, there was a really great piece done by the New York Times, and they actually did a little short video on the story, and you could probably look it up on the Gold Coast. Dementia Behind Bars, I think it was. Yeah, and it is. I think it is probably, and it interviews individuals who are part of the Gold Coast program, and it's been life changing for those guys. Some of them are in there for life, and they talk about their own personal story and how they ended up there, but then how this is really, it's challenging, but it's sort of really changed them as people.
It's very similar to some of the inmates who talk about learning hospice skills for their cellmates who are dying, that it really helps them feel a sense of meaning and purpose, which they they haven't felt before, certainly.
Yeah.
So this is also fascinating, and I don't, it's a population that's kind of out of sight, out of mind for many of us, but that our demographic, as it shifts, this really impacts everyone. And it's really interesting to hear how adjustments have to be made for this.
Yeah, I think that because we have a tendency to deny our own aging process, the denial or the sort of not being on the radar of people who are in prison who are aging as well is, because when we sort of talk about this sort of research, people often say to me, "Oh God, I didn't even think about older people in prison,"
Right. I mean, we barely think about inmates anyway, and to imagine that there are these issues that are happening systemically.
Yeah, but it does, as you say, it does impact all of us in the sense that we have a sort of a system of care that's called Medicare in Australia. And a portion of our, tax goes to supporting health, which, by the way, prisoners, once you go to prison, don't have access to. But they do get health care. It's just that it's not part of this greater Medicare system. But economically, certainly, it does impact us, which myself and a number of colleagues from the Centre of Excellence in Population Aging Research wrote a paper about, the one I think you mentioned at the beginning. And what my colleague Raf Chomik, who's an economist, did was he took health costs from what we know in the general population, and he took into account the accelerated aging that occurs in the prisoner population, and then did some modelled projections of what aged care costs will cost in the prisoner population if the rate of change continues to grow and we continue to have a much higher or older prison population. And it's sort of like beyond like exponential costs, it's like if you look at the graph, it just goes way off the chart, up into the 100 millions to manage the healthcare in the current way that it's being managed from what we know from government reports and things like that. So in that way, because each state pays for the prison costs, right? So in that way, it is everybody's problem. It's just we don't think about it.
I think that's a really important point. Where can people find out more about your work, the initiatives, and some of the research projects that are going on related to the aging prison population?
Yeah, sure. So my colleagues and I we're all here at the University of New South Wales, but we also collaborate with another colleague at Monash, Susan Badawi, who's done an enormous amount of research on this area as well, and my other colleagues, Adrian Withall. So they can look up at University of New South Wales, Aging Futures Institute, Natasha Ginnivan and Adrian Withall.
Okay.
And we've got sort of all of our projects on this area. We've also recently sort of put together a background paper on the aging prisoners in collaboration with the Australian Association of Gerontology, which just came out this week. So yeah, there's quite a lot there.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for helping us understand this hidden problem, but very important problem, and one that is affecting all of us. I really appreciate your time.
Great. It's great to be here, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Zestful Aging. If you like the podcast, please share it with some of your friends.
Our music is courtesy of Judy Banker, who was a previous guest on the show. Find out more at judybanker.com. And our technical director is Stephen Litweiler. Hello, Zesties. Well, many of you know that I've been a psychotherapist for more than 30 years, and I'm an expert in healthy aging. But what you might not know is that I'm also a midlife coach, and I help women like you clarify and design the life you want to live in your second half. A life that's vibrant and feels uniquely like you. Maybe you've spent your entire life caring for others in one way or another, and you're a bit stuck with how to move forward in this new phase of your life. Or maybe you're considering a career change or other big life transition. Or maybe you're in the middle of a life change you didn't see coming. You may be asking yourself questions like, who am I now? And how do I build a new kind of life for myself? Or how do I make the most of the time I have left? This stage in our lives is the perfect time to pause, recalibrate, and reassess where our life is heading and ask ourselves what deserves our precious time. Now is the time to focus on what brings you joy and a sense of deep, calm contentment. I love helping women discover who they are in addition to being caregivers. After our sessions, you will have a clear plan for making your life more vibrant and deeply satisfying. You will feel a sense of control because you will be making choices that are perfect for you. And you will feel more confident because you will have an individualized blueprint to follow. And because you're a Zestful Aging podcast listener, I'm offering a special package deal. Contact me at zestfulaging.com right through my contact link. Time is truly precious, and there's no time to waste.
And stay tuned next week for another interview with a fascinating and inspiring guest.